Hello everyone, welcome back for more human physiology and the start of a new chapter. So just so you're aware moving forward, this is going to be one of the longest chapters that we cover in this course, so I just want to make sure that you are well prepared. But with that being said, let's start gently here with just a quick little review about the difference between endocrine and neural signaling so that we'll know exactly what we're dealing with in this chapter on the endocrine system. So you will recall that dating back to our discussions on cell-to-cell communication, the nervous system and the endocrine system are all about permitting long-distance communication in the body. With the nervous system, we achieve that long-distance communication by sending electrical signals called action potentials, which are transmitted through nerves. So we can get long-distance communication because those nerves tend to be very long, and they connect places like the brain to the heart, the brain to the intestines, the brain to a number of other different possible effectors throughout the body. So the idea here is that once the electrical signal reaches the end of the nerve, a chemical signal called a neurotransmitter will be released onto the effector or target cells, and those cells will respond once that neurotransmitter binds to its appropriate receptor. So, for example, a signal from the brain going through the spinal cord and through a nerve to the heart could possibly provide the instructions needed to get the heart to beat faster. You've already seen this firsthand in one of the labs that you did. So the endocrine system, we achieve long-distance communication purely through chemical signaling, right? So we're not using any sort of electrical signal. Everything is happening via a hormone, which is a chemical signal, traveling through the blood on its merry way to finding its target or effector cells. So if you'd like an illustration of how this works, this should be very helpful here. So up top, we have a neuron. So the neuron has its cell body here where you would find its nucleus and mitochondria and other sorts of things. It has its very long axon, and then the end of the axon is called the axon terminal. So you can see here that the axon can cover a very long distance because those axons tend to be very long. So once that electrical signal traveling from the cell body towards the axon terminal, once that electrical signal reaches the end of the axon terminal, we release neurotransmitter molecules that will then bind to receptors on target cells, and those target cells will then respond with the appropriate physiological action that we want. With the endocrine system, we are going to have collections of cells called endocrine glands, so the pancreas, the thyroid, just to name a couple of examples. There's no electrical activity here. What they are going to do is synthesize and secrete hormones in response to their own stimulus. These hormones will get into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream, as we said, covers pretty much the whole body, so pretty much every cell in the body has access to what is in the bloodstream. So theoretically, these hormones could go just about anywhere in the body. They have access to just about any cells, but only a very select few cells are going to be able to respond to these hormones because only a few select cells will have receptors for those particular hormones. So similar to what we saw with the neurotransmitter, cells that are targets of a hormone will give us our desired response once that hormone binds to the appropriate receptor. So in both ways, with both neural and endocrine signaling, we can achieve long-distance communication between a control center and an effector. This is something that we definitely talked about in the communication unit, so we will be brief in discussing this, but this is just another comparison and contrasting of endocrine versus nervous system signaling. The ones we focused on were the response time, so we agreed that electrical signals are unsurprisingly faster, so we can turn on a neural response loop much quicker. But as far as duration of action goes, hormonal responses will last much, much, much longer. So let's talk a little bit about some of the endocrine glands that we might see throughout this chapter. So let's start with a definition of what makes something endocrine in nature. So anything can be an endocrine gland as long as it satisfies two requirements. It has to synthesize a hormone, and it has to secrete that same hormone. So what you're seeing in this picture are kind of what we call the classical endocrine glands, meaning that these are glands that we kind of expect making hormones to be their primary function, right? So we're talking about things like the thyroid, the hypothalamus and pituitary, the pancreas, the adrenal glands, the reproductive glands. So these are organs that making hormones is kind of what they do. That's kind of their primary function, right? But that does not necessarily preclude other organs from being endocrine, right? As we said, the only requirements are that a tissue or an organ has to make a hormone and secrete that same hormone for it to be considered endocrine. So some other organs that do have endocrine functions, even though nobody would say that making hormones is their primary responsibility, the heart makes a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP, and that is a hormone that has a big effect on sodium homeostasis in the body. The kidneys make two hormones, one called renin, which we will talk about much later in the semester, and then the other one called erythropoietin, which is the chemical stimulus that gets red blood cell production going. The skin makes a hormone called vitamin D, and the stomach makes a variety of different hormones, one being ghrelin, which function in both digestive functions and in our sense of satiety. Basically, when are we full and when are we not full? And then this is the last thing that we're going to say in this particular introductory video, but this is absolutely fundamental and absolutely essential. You absolutely have to understand this principle before you go any further in your study of the endocrine system. Each hormone is going to have a particular receptor that it binds to, right? So this is absolutely required if a hormone is going to have an effect on a cell. So in the communication unit, we talked about the distinction between a target cell and a non-target cell. So for any given hormone, like what you're seeing here, the yellow cell is secreting its hormone into the blood. We said that most cells in the body are going to have access to what is in the bloodstream, meaning they have access to hormones in the bloodstream. But it's only going to be a very small number of cells in the body that can actually respond to that hormone, because that small percentage of cells, they are going to have the correct receptor for that particular hormone. So you'll notice in this picture, the hormone is kind of a circle shape, and the blue target cell on the far right has a receptor that kind of has a circular shaped groove that it can fit into that receptor. This green cell, which is not a target cell for that particular hormone, it has receptors, but that is not the correct receptor, because that receptor has more of a triangular groove for a hormone to fit into. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of receptors out there. Cells are going to have different combinations of different receptors, but for a particular hormone, only a very small number of cells in the body will have a receptor for that particular hormone, usually speaking. So when a hormone does bind to a receptor on a target cell, then we're going to do the sorts of things that we talked about in the communication unit. We may activate a signal transduction mechanism that will produce some type of response. That response may be vasoconstriction or vasodilation, like what we talked about with epinephrine. It may be the heart beats faster or beats slower. So the responses can be very, very, very varied. But this is the absolutely essential principle here. You've got to have a receptor if you are a cell responding to a particular hormone. So that's going to do it for this introductory video for Chapter 17. So next time we are going to start talking about particular hormones. Specifically, we're going to talk about 3 different classes of hormones so that every specific hormone that we come across, we can place them into one of these 3 different classes. And there's a lot of inferences that we can make about a hormone depending on which class that we put it in. So we'll go ahead and sign off here for now. See you next time.